Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Watchers Movie Club. I'm your host, Garrett.
And I'm Kevin.
And this is a show where we take a movie every week, similar to a book club, and discuss it. On today's show, we are covering the classic comedy, Modern Times. So all our thoughts and more coming up on Movie Club. Released in 1936, Modern Times was directed by Charlie Chaplin and stars Charlie Chaplin, Paulette Goddard, and Henry Bergman. The tramp struggles to live in modern industrial society with the help of a young homeless woman. It is currently number 49 on IMDb's top 250. It has 4.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd and is ranked number 147 on its top 250. Before we dive into our thoughts, though, we do want to issue a spoiler warning for the film. We will be discussing plot points, twists, things that happen, and jokes in this instance. So if you haven't seen the film yet, we'd recommend going to watch it first and then coming back here. As the time of recording, it is on HBO Max, so you can find it there. Stay tuned to the end of the show to see what we have coming for you next week. Alrighty, Kevin, so there's a little bit of a twist. We've already covered a comedy on this show. We covered Groundhog Day previously, but this is... Is this your first Chaplin film?
You popped my cherry Chaplin cherry.
I love it when I can pop someone's cherry Chaplin.
I've been waiting a week to say that.
I'm leaving that in. So obviously this was your first time watching it. I had seen this film several times. I'd seen it in film classes when I was in high school and in college, and then again twice recently. We covered this back on the Drive Back podcast before this, and now watching it again for Movie Club. So I'm pretty well versed in this movie. I've really loved Charlie Chaplin's work. I think it kind of goes beyond the time it's made, especially with this film that we'll dive into in just a moment. So, Kevin, what are your initial thoughts? Like, what stood out to you about Modern Times? I'm so interested to hear, because again, we popped your Chaplin cherry. What do you think of this film?
This movie is better than Groundhog's Day, and it was made way longer, way back in history. So, I mean, it's just a good old school movie with some talking, but some, like, I don't know, how did they get the people on the TV back then?
I mean, it's going to be some clever editing tricks, layering of film on top of each other. Obviously there's no computers back then, so they had to do it all in the editing room. So
yeah, well, and then the story too, you never get lost in the story, which is nice. Some movies nowadays, you're like, wait, when did we get back here? Oh, wait, we're over there now? This one is just like, hey, cue card, this is what's happening. Hey, cue card, this is what's happening. And it keeps you on that track, which is very nice, which I admire, because, again, some of the modern movies, you don't know where you're at half the time in the movie. So...
yeah, there's a magic almost to these older films, these title cards. It's odd to say, but it feels like an event. It feels like something that you don't get to see anymore. And if you do, it's so artsy fartsy that it may lose half of its audience before it gets to its point. So it's refreshing after watching a lot of modern films to see something like this.
Yeah, and then it's like, I would point it out, this would be like, have you seen Asteroid City yet?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, it would be like kind of like Asteroid City tried to take the cuts and then put like a cue card here and stuff. It just didn't feel the same. This one felt naturally done, and it was like supposed to be in the movie and stuff. But just for my first Charlie Chaplin movie, I think this was a great pick. It was funny. I didn't think about how funny it was going to be, because I'm like, oh, it's an older movie. It's not like that kind of style funny, but it's like Three Stooges funny. And that's what I had to think about when watching it. And it was great. I was laughing.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's one of those films that it predates, and not only predates, obviously chronologically it predates a lot of things, but both Charlie Chaplin and also Buster Keaton, who's also another legend of this time, are direct influences for people like the Three Stooges, like Abbott and Costello, and even later people like Jim Carrey and other comedians of today's time. Like, to say that he's an icon or a legend is an understatement. He still has the longest standing ovation at the Academy Awards. Was when he got his honorary Oscar when he was like in his 70s. Like, he is a respected guy, and not a lot. And while not all of his work is, I would say, as substantial as Modern Times, excuse me. City Lights is the other big one, and then The Great Dictator are like the big three. There's also other ones like The Gold Rush and Dog's Life and things like that. But these are kind of the big three that a lot of film buffs really talk about. And this one for me is just, it's almost weird because a lot of Charlie Chaplin's films have to do with the tramp, who is the character that we see in this film. The one that walks kind of odd, has the bowler hat, has the cane. That's his signature character. And usually it's pretty down to earth. A lot of the films came out during the Depression era and that kind of time frame in American history, where this almost feels a little bit fantasy-like. There are points in this movie that reminds me of films like Metropolis, which are like early sci-fi movies, because the factory that he works in is not a factory of that time. They didn't have projector screens or TVs. They didn't have feeding robots, which that feeding robot scene is still...
It's so funny.
It's perfect.
That's so funny.
But like none of that exists. But the way that it's all designed, it just looks like it's like not a cyberpunk, like a steampunk kind of like futuristic 30s. Maybe something that's like maybe 20 or 30 years ahead, but still has the style of the 30s. But then you get out of the factory and it's your typical 1930s America. And it's just a really fascinating dichotomy between the factory life versus the other life that they go for.
And even the factory life, when it kind of shows like the Great Depression in this as well, because he always needs to be looking for a job. He doesn't have a steady job, and every time he gets like a little bit of info on a job, he has to run to it. It's not like it's not a steady job. He always has to hop from job to job. But it's really funny when he takes the bread and he wants to go back to prison because he was happy in prison. And everybody's like, why are you happy in prison?
Well, if you think about it, it's like today with people who are, experiencing homelessness. A lot of them will commit a crime to go to jail because you get 3 meals a day and you get showers and all that. It's kind of the same thing there, but in his instance, it's regular food, it's a place to stay, and after he does the nose powder, which is
so funny.
The fact that he's putting a lot of salt on his bread and beans or whatever they're eating. But like that's how he's able to like fight back, in a manner of speaking. I just love that he keeps trying to hit people on the head with the door, and he actually has to set the one guy up and do it again. But then he carries that letter with him because the sheriff is like, no, you're a good guy, and he carries that letter with him the entire movie. So it's just it's a fantastic way to to show the time, and you hit the nail on the head. It is representative of the Depression era. That's, as far as I know, I'm not too up to date on my like Chaplin lore, my Chaplin history to say, but the tramp character was made to show that people in Hollywood were trying to relate to what was going on, because in a lot of the earlier tramp films from the 20s, he's an immigrant. He comes over from somewhere in Europe and he's continuously struggling for a job, struggling for food, and kind of showing that someone who is higher up, someone who does have maybe more of a social status, is trying to identify with the people that are going through those struggles. I think it's a really powerful piece of work.
And what a workman this Charlie Chaplin is. He directed it, he wrote it, and he starred in it. He
also wrote all the music.
Oh, and he wrote, like you don't see directors doing that nowadays.
Very rare.
Or if they direct it and play it, but that's it. They don't do 4 things out of the whole movie. He basically worked his ass off to make his movie the way he wanted it to.
Yeah, and that's actually I don't remember if this film was under United Artists. There is a studio called United Artists that Charlie Chaplin founded, and it was because he wanted more direct control over his films and wanted to make them his way. So we're kind of one of the first people in Hollywood to do something like that. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
There is one moment in this movie, though, that I do really want to talk about, and that is the final sequence in the cafe. Probably one of my favorite film moments of all time, aside from the beginning of the film having to do with the feeding machine and kind of being sucked through the innards of the manufacturing process. But the actual cafe sequence, and particularly when he's singing. Now, this is the first Chaplin movie to ever feature spoken word. No Chaplin film had ever had any dialogue whatsoever that wasn't written on the title card. This was the first one that actually had people talking. And I think the artistic decision to only have the shop manager or the factory owner or whoever talking during the initial parts of the film really kind of starts to show you the power dynamic in the beginning. But when Charlie Chaplin sings at the end of this movie, not only is it hilarious, but there's an interesting fun fact that I want to share with you, that this is the first time that Charlie Chaplin had ever spoken in a movie ever. And it's the first time that the Tramp had spoken in a movie ever. And he specifically said, well, if it's the first time the Tramp's going to talk, it should just be gibberish. And that's exactly what he sings in that song. It's no coherent language. It's just jumbled together. He predated the Minions in their language, if you want to think about it that way. But it is so ingenious because you get the humor in what he's trying to say by the way he moves and the way he dances, but the words make no sense. And it's just, again, I love talking about film as magic, and it's just one of those magical moments that just, it puts a smile on my face, even though I've seen this movie like 10 times.
Yeah. I mean, his performance in that singing sequence, like he's stepping into the car, but he doesn't have to say he's stepping into the car. He can just literally, what you said, gibberish. But I knew exactly what he was doing.
And it's the hallmark of a great performance and someone who's really putting in their passion and their love into it. And if I can get a clip of it, I'll put it in here because it's just too funny not to. But I absolutely adore this sequence. And yeah, I think it's just, again, it's purely magical.
And it also isn't, so it's a comedy, but it also has a sad side to it because of the orphan girl. Her dad gets shot trying to look for work, and then gets her sisters taken away. She runs away, but then the Tramp finds her, and they basically not have a life together, but they're roommates, I would say. They
hit it off. They're you know, every Tramp film kind of features him getting the girl in the end. And you know, obviously it's a product of its time, so it's, you know, this film isn't luckily so bad about it. There are some of them that come off kind of like assaulty sometimes.
Oh, really?
I mean, it was the 30s and the 20s. It was a different time, you know, and you can't really look at that with today's lens. This one, though, I feel like is pretty normal. I feel like they actually kind of like develop a friendship, or maybe even a liking for each other. You know, he may fancy her, you know, I never know. But it's just funny the way they meet. He takes the bread. Yeah, I was the one that stole it. And then the witness and the bread guy are like, no, she stole it. And I think, again, it really plays up the emotional angle of this film, right? Like, it has an emotional angle to it. It has this narrative that it's trying to tell about the working man and obviously the status of the kind of the Depression era of the time. And it does it really well.
And even the short like joy of happiness when they find the abandoned cabin, but they call it home, and you can tell that they're happy just to have something over their heads, which is really, it's just, you don't see that in a lot of movies where people have lost everything and then the little things just come up once in a while and they're grateful for it.
Yeah, you don't really see that anymore, which is kind of like, it's another magical part of the movie. And that whole sequence in the abandoned shack has some pretty great slapstick humor in it. Like sitting down in the chair and he happens to set it right over the cracks in the floor and just falls straight down every time he walks in the door.
That's what I was going to say. He looks at it too and he goes, okay, and did it again. Like, it's not going to happen this time.
Chaplin is just amazing at it. And I would say this movie is not so much his strongest in terms of slapstick comedy. I would actually say some of his other films have a lot more of his, trademark slapstick comedy to it. This one definitely is more plot driven and is more, it is very funny, but it's also very kind of emotional as well. And I think that it speaks to the breadth and the diversity of what Chaplin could do with the character of the tramp. One of the other things I actually wanted to talk about with this movie is the department store sequence, which, if any of you have seen the top 150 films video I posted here on the channel, the first part of that clip is actually from the department store. And there's the part where he's roller skating blindfolded and gets perilously close to the edge where there's no railing. And that sequence is just so impressive because, again, this is the 30s. How do you think they did that?
It would have to be slides. They would put a slide underneath it and then film over top of it or something like that.
So it was all in shot. There was no editing tricks.
So that's just a big asshole in there?
Sort of. Okay. So it is actually, there is a hole, but it goes down probably 3 inches. And everything there is a matte painting. And so he was never at risk of actually falling off. I mean, he would fall potentially because he actually did all that choreography blindfolded. Like, he did that. That's just how talented Chaplin was. He was able to do that. And it just, to this day, looks impressive because it was all done in camera. It's very hard to notice where those details are in that matte painting. And it just, again, old movies have a magic to them that is just kind of indescribable. And it's sequences like that that really nail that point home for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you show this in a movie class and like what you just asked me, how did he make it? You'll get from maybe 7 different answers and they all are really good answers, but it's just the simple answer that makes it more magic. It's just a painting. Someone just painted that.
Yeah. Like, it's literally easier than you think. I remember this was on, we've talked about Corridor Crew before. This was on one of their episodes, and they couldn't guess what it was. Like, someone had to tell them, yeah, it was a matte painting, just like a couple inches down. Absolutely nuts.
And they're amazed, and they do all this digital stuff, and they're just like, it's just a painting. That's all it is. And it's like, yeah, it can be that simple, but you have to frame it in a way to make it look incredible. And that's what he did. He probably raised the camera up maybe 10 feet, and it's kind of looking downward on him like that. So it looks like there's some depth to it, but he's still in frame.
Yes, exactly. And it's all about framing. It's all about knowing where to place your camera, which are some deeper kind of topics that are probably a little too much for Movie Club. But at some point, hopefully we can talk about those in the future. But absolutely, again, it's fantastic. It's great. So in kind of the biggest, I think, advertisement we could possibly give to say, hey, watch older movies. Kevin, what were your kind of your final thoughts going into this, and what did you rate it?
Final thoughts going into this was coming out of this, actually, really good 1930 movies that shows some, no pun intended, modern times in it. With the matte paintings, and some of the effects are just hold up till this day, which is very nice. I get a 4.5 stars out of 5, but my rating out of 100 is a 95. So it's still, sometimes it was a little slow, and sometimes like we didn't need to see like the girl as much as we needed to, or something like that. Little things, but for a movie of its time, I mean, if I saw this in the 50s, it would be 100 out of 100 probably. Yeah,
it's actually funny because I also have the film at 4.5 stars, and I have it at a 95. So we're actually eye to eye on this one. yeah, again, absolutely love this movie. I don't think its magic is lost, almost 100 years later. I think this movie still has all of its charm. It has all of its wit. It has all of its humor. And for those of us who don't want to watch older films just because they're black and white or maybe they're boring, this film is literally you're missing out. This movie is end to end incredible.
It's just like subs. Don't let black and white block your field of view with movies. Sometimes they're the best movies. Like, well, hopefully we'll go over it on this channel. Casablanca. Haven't seen it before, so it would be a first watch for me. But
that one is definitely coming up, as is probably one of the best black and white films ever made, Citizen Kane. So
okay,
we'll be covering those.
But like, you'll be missing out on Universal monsters that are black and white. So you always got to look back at movie roots. Even though they're black and white, they still hold a bigger purpose in the movie industry.
Older films, black and white films, subtitled films. Don't let them scare you away. It's the holy trifecta of scaring Americans away from the movies. So the question now falls to you. What do you think of Modern Times? We'd love to hear what you think in the description down below, but remember to be respectful of one another. Next week, we'll be covering the classic drama 12 Angry Men. Can't wait to discuss that here on the show, so make sure you watch it before then. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us here on YouTube and everywhere you can find us on social media, with plenty of content coming under the name Real Watchers Everywhere. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep your eyes on the screen.